The girls were taken in the dark hours before dawn, their voices carried away into the mechanical belly of an empire that believed itself invulnerable. No alarm sounded, no defenders arrived, only the silence of a colony waking too late to save its children, only the emptiness of homes without laughter, only the question that sat like a stone on every tongue. What happens when you touch what belongs to humanity? These ships that carried them away were sleek predators, black against the void. To their captains, it was an errand, little more than livestock retrieval. Humans, they reasoned, were unruly but not dangerous. The empire stretched across 1,000 systems. It could not even remember all its subject races. They were taken, for study, for experiment, for amusement, for reasons so casual they did not deserve to be called reasons at all. An overseer laughed as the captives wept, saying they had captured the future of apes, as if the phrase were a punchline. Among the girls was one whose quiet defiance was mistaken for weakness. She whispered a prayer into the airlock, not to be heard, but to be carried. Another clutched her sister's hand and said nothing, because silence was stronger than begging. One was only 16, one early 20. All of them pressed into chains and catalogued by creatures who thought they understood value. They didn't see the weight of human memory, the way grief becomes fuel, the way humiliation becomes a vow. The news traveled fast, not through empire channels, but through the underground ways humans had always preferred. Whispers, encoded transmissions, smuggled signals that moved faster than light, because rage has no need often genes. When it reached Earth, the planet did not erupt. It did not cry out. It smiled, and that smile unsettled those few aliens who had lived long enough to recognize what it meant. But in the halls of the Imperial Citadel, it was met with condescension. One senator dismissed it as teeth-bearing from primitive animals. Another called it quaint tribal mourning. They did not know it was neither First Envoy Aravednot in a warship, but in a modest diplomatic cruiser painted white. Its lines almost archaic compared to the angular majesty of imperial craft. At its helm was Captain Sarah Consincade. Her voice gentle, her manner reverential. She walked into their chamber, without armor, without weapons, and thanked them for their hospitality. The Empire mistook this for weakness. They did not notice how her eyes lingered on exits, how her measured words carried the weight of calculation. She was polite, to the point of unsettling, smiling too much, nodding too often. Her tone as warm as a hearth fire, yet her phrasing precise. Asa Surgeon's scalpel. "We would like our girls back," she said, as though requesting the return of a misplaced coat. "We don't begrudge mistakes. Cultures differ. Sometimes boundaries are misunderstood, but they are ours, and we would be very grateful if they were restored to us." She folded her hands in her lap, as though in prayer, her expression serene. Only a few aliens realized her calm was not submission. But warning, the council chamber erupted with laughter. One alien minister leaned back in his chair and asked why a tribe of savages thought itself equal to an empire of 1,000 species. Anther ridiculed Earth's military statistics, reciting them as if they were proof of fragility. Small fleets, limited palation, primitive fusion drives. You have not yet unified your own world. What could you possibly do against us? He gestured at her as though she were an amusing child who had wandered into an adult's banquet. Sarah nodded. "All true. We are young. We are improvisational. We've always relied on creativity more than structure. And perhaps that is why Wu do not understand us. You measure strength in fleets and engines, why measure it in something else?" She did not define what. She let the silence do the work. For a moment, it was heavier than any argument. One of the older senators, whose species remembered retrodators in its evolutionary past, felt the hairs on his neck rise. He all recognized the cadence of her voice. It was not the plea of prey, but the opening gambit of something else. Hemdra. A warning to his peers, but they brushed him aside. Fear was for lesser creatures. They ruled galaxies. They had no need to fear a smiling woman. The girls remained in captivity. Scientists began their procedures, carefully cataloging hair, skin, blood, laughter, tears. They joked among themselves about human fragility. One technician held up a strand of hair and mused how easily it burned. He did not imagine how easily his own fleet might. Their reports dripped with arrogance. Unremarkable physiology, limited resilience, emotional volatility, no threat beyond nuisance value. They filed it away as subtle fact, never questioning whether they were recording their own obituary. Back on Earth, the message was clear. They had been touched. Humanity has always been slow to rouse, content to argue, bicker, and quarrel among itself, but harm their children, and the noise falls away. Old rivalries dissolve. Across the planet, ancient enemies looked at one another and saw only allies. Across colonies, desperate banners lowered, and one banner rose. It was not a banner of conquest, not yet, but of something feralder. Survival sharpened into vengeance. Sarah delivered her final statement before leaving the council. "Whisk once more for their return, not because we cannot take them back, but because we would rather not. We dislike conflict. It is costly. It is untidy, and we value cleanliness." The alien chuckled at her quaint metaphor. They did not notice how her eyes did not chthonk them again, bowed, and departed with the same serenity she had arrived in. To the Empire, it seemed as though nothing had shifted. To humanity, everything had. The captives themselves waited in the sterile light of alien laboratories, whispering to each other to remain alive. One said her mother would come. Another said her father would not sleep until he had torn the stars apart to find her. They spoke with certainty of faith, not as children, but as daughters of a species that had clawed its way up from caves by promising never to leave its own behind. Their chains were real, but they were lighter than the hope that burned in their chests. On a distant station, a young alien officer reviewed human history for amusement. He chuckled at the endless wars, the chaos of politics, the absurdity of cultural rituals. "They fight each other more than their enemies," he told his commander. But when read deeper, when he stumbled across stories of wars begun over a single insult, over a single captive, over the defense of honor and kin, he felt a chill he could not name. His superior dismissed his concern, telling him humans were erratic but harmless. He did not sleep well that night. The boom that had begun, this story had not ended. It reverberated, spreading outward. It was not thunder, but the distant drum of something older, something primal. It beat in the hearts of parents who would not rest, in the minds of leaders who knew delay was death, in the dreams of children who had learned too early that safety. It was the sound of a storm not yet visible on the horizon, but inevitable all the same. When Sarah returned to her ship, her crew asked what the Empire had decided. She smiled again, that same unsettling smile, and said softly, "They laughed." Noon. Else spoke. They all knew what laughter meant in this context. It meant the time for requests was over. It meant countdown had begun. It meant that a species mistaken for livestock had been placed in chains, and that the Empire had just declared war without understanding it had done so. The girls whispered prayers again in the dark, unaware that their voices had already been heard. Not by gods, not by chance, but by a world that would not forgive. And somewhere deep in the void, engines awakened, old alliances stirred, and humanity leaned forward as if listening. The Empire thought the capture was complete. They did not understand the real capture waste theirs, sealed the moment the boom first sounded, and in the silence after, the galaxy held its breath, waiting to learn what humans do when you steal their daughters. The council chamber shimmered with pale light from 1,000 suspended crystals, each one attuned to catch and refract the glow of distant suns. To the Galactic Empire, this was civilization itself. Elegance, majesty, and architecture meant to dwell. Visitors to Captain Sakin Cade, standing small yet composed at the center of that vast hollow dome. It looked like a mausoleum that had not yet learned what it was burying. She spoke without raising her voice. "I am here, Asa friend. I am here to request one last time the return of what you have taken." The chamber stirred. Some aliens shifted uncomfortably, others sneered. The Aunja species among them, scaled and brittle, laughed aloud. One ambassador, with translucent wings, fanned them dismally. "Your girls are no more special than larvae, harvested from nests. You should be grateful they are even of interest to us." Sarah smiled, though her eyes did not. Grateful is not the word I would have chosen. A ripple of amusement spread through the chamber. They found her charm absurd, her composure naive. She had walked into the heart of power, armed only with manners. They thought it was bravery, born of ignorance. They did not yet recognize the patience of a hunter. One elder leaned forward, his voice rich with condescension. Your species speaks as if it matters. Do you know how many worlds kneel here? Do you know how many tribes begged for mercy and received it only because we found them ornamental? Sarah inclined her head as if he had praised her. Ornamental. That's a word we rarely use back home. We prefer irreplaceable. She allowed the silence to stretch her tone to calm Todesmus easily. Another minister interjected, irritated by the lack of submission. Why threaten what you can attend force? You have no fleets to rival ours, no armies, no reach. She nodded in agreement. No reach. Yes, I suppose if one measures only in numbers, you are correct. But humans are fond of saying, don't. Count the dogs in a fight. Count the fight in the dog. The translator struggled, then relayed the phrase as best it could. Several senators frowned, confused. A few laughed nervously. One or two of those who remembered predators in their evolutionary past shifted uncomfortably at the odd human tendency to compare themselves to biting animals. Sarah let the laughter pass before continuing, her voice honeyed. We asked politely because that is how we prefer to begin. But do not confuse preference with necessity. Our history is littered with stories of people who mistook patience for weakness. I assure you, none of those people remain. The elder with wings leaned forward. Are you threatening the Empire, child? Her lips curved upward. Threats are noisy. I prefer promises. Behind her calm, her crew waited in silence aboard the diplomatic cruiser. They knew her rhythms, her phrasing. When she smiled too long, it was a signal. When she bowed slightly, it was another. Her words were as choreographed as any battle plan. The Empire thought she was improvising. They did not realize she was laying out the first moves of a dance humanity had rehearsed across millennia. One senator tried to mock her. Promises from primitives. You still burn fuel to escape your own gravity. Sarah chuckled softly, shaking her head. Yes, it is almost embarrassing, isn't it? We use old tricks, rockets, chemical burns, ugly tin cans. But we got where we wanted to go. We set foot on our moon when we were still half feral. Do you know why? Because someone dared us, and humans cannot resist a dare. The chamber stilled, not because they grasped the full meaning, but because her tone lacked any of the humility they had expected. It was not boasting. It was memory, cold and factual, delivered like weather. A younger alien envoy whispered to his superior, "Why does she smile when she speaks of war?" His superior hushed him, unwilling to admit he did not. No. Sarah's datapad lit briefly in her hand. She did not look at it, but she knew what it meant. The first reports were in a small outpost along the rim had gone dark. It was nothing significant in the Empire's vast expanse. Yet everything in terms of symbolism, the humans had moved while she spoke. Her words recover, her smiley a distraction. She folded her hands again. We do not want war. Truly we didn't. It ruins so many things. Trade, culture, family dinners. And we do lover dinners. A flicker of humor passed through her eyes, deliberate. But Heraeus, the thing about humans, we do not mind fighting if it means the children come home. The aliens scoffed, but listened. Now their amusement was wearing thin, replaced with a gnawing edge they could not name. Then came the moment that unsettled the most. Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. You don't understand what you've done. You think you've captured a handful of girls. What you've captured us are restraint, and restraint, once removed, does not return easily. The Chambord rippled with unease. The elder, who had mocked her, now found himself strangely reluctant to meet her gaze. Something in her stillness pressed. Against him, like an invisible weight, another senator, eager to restore the appearance of control, scoffed. Humans are fractured, disorganized, still clawing at one another. You will never unify. Sarah's smile widened almost imperceptibly. You are right. We argue, we divide, we quarrel, we invent reasons to despise each other. But touch our daughters and watch how fast the noise dies. Her words lingered like smoke. Some laughed again, desperate to dispel the tension, but their laughter rang hollow. Even the ones who did not understand her metaphors could sense the pulse beneath them. The session was adjourned in a haze of arrogance and unease. Officially, the Empire dismissed the request. Unofficially, several species began discreetly questioning whether this was wise. They whisper in corridors, remembering rumors of ancient stubbornness, of soldiers who fought until there was nothing left but teeth and bone. That night, Sarah walketh quiet corridors of her ship. One of her officers approached, concerned. "They're not giving them back, are they?" "No," she said simply. "They're not." "Then what now?" She paused, looking out at Thesters that seemed to lean closer as if waiting. "Now we give them one more chance to listen. Then we stop it." The officer nodded, though his hands trembled. He knew what stop talking meant in human military code. It meant the gloves were off. It meant patience was spent. The next morning, Sarah sent a single message to the Council. "We dislike conflict. It is untidy, but untidiness never lingers long around us." Some found the message amusing. Some found it chilling. One old senator, haunted by instincts his kind, had buried under centuries of peace, whispered the words over and over so, trying to convince himself they were empty. While the council debated, reports continued to arrive. Another outpost silenced. A supply convoy vanished. "Primitives," the minister scoffed. "Coincidence? Pirates? Mechanical failure?" But the unease spread. What if coincidence had teeth? On the third day, Sarah was invited again, this time into a smaller chamber where only the highest sat. The intimate setting would unnerve her. Instead, she sat cross-legged, smiling, as if she were at a neighbor's kitchen table. One minister said coldly, "You are playing with fire." Her reply was measured, perfectly polite. "Fire is our oldest friend." The silence afterward was a chasm. They stared at her, bewildered, unsettled, trying to decide whether she was a fool or something they had never encountered before. Then she arose, bowed once more, and said softly, "This is the last time I ask. Return them, and it ends here. Refuse, and you will learn what we mean by family." She left them with that word, family. A word they did not fully understand, but one that carried the weight of something stronger than weapons, sharper than armies. It lingered in the chamber long after she had gone, clinging to their thoughts like a shadow. In her absence, the Kunz erupted. Some demanded immediate retaliation. Others counseled old caution. The argument stretched forwards, but one truth hovered unspoken in every mind. Humanity had smiled, while drawing its lines. Back aboard her ship, Sarah received the signal she had been waiting for. The second outpost was gone. This time there were no survivors to send reports. She read the transmission in silence, then closed it, her hand steady. Her first officer whispered, "They still think we—" Sarah's smile returned, softer than before, but carrying the weight of centuries. Then let them. The stars beyond the viewport seemed to flicker in response, as though they too anticipated what came next. And in the heart of the Empire, unease began to coalesce into fear, though none would name it aloud. The polite warning had been given. The request had been made. The silence that followed was not peace. It was the drawing of breath before the storm. And somewhere in the depths of space, fleets that had never flown together began to stir. Answering not to orders, not to politics, but to something older and more dangerous, the cry of blood. The Empire thought it had dismissed a petitioner. It had instead lit a fuse. The Galactic Senate gathered in a chamber so vast it could have swallowed cities. Its tears alive with the Chatteroff, a 100 species. The Empire prided itself on order, on the inevitability of its dominance. Yet now there was a thread of tension woven into every voice. The reports of vanishing outposts had reached them, dismissed publicly as accidents, but repeated often enough to prick at the edges of confidence. An elder delegate pounded the floor with a staff. "Coincidence," he thundered, his gills flaring. "Pirates' malfunctions, the cows of unregulated frontiers. Do not ascribe to humans what is simply the noise of space." But others were less certain. A senator from a species that had once endured predation spoke more accurately. "Noise does not repeat with such precision. Outposts silenced one by one, always along the same arc. That is not chance. That is pattern, and pattern isn't." The chamber simmered. They had captured girls. After all, children by human reckoning. It should have been an afterthought. Yet the memory of Captain Sarah Kinsinked's smile haunted them. There had been no tremor in her voice, no trace of desperation, only the disconcerting poise of someone offering gone opportunity she expected to. B refused. Far from the chamber, in the shadows of the frontier, human ships moved with unsettling grace. They were not elegant by imperial standards. Their hulls bore the scars of crude metallurgy. Their engines burned like bonfires compared to the soft glow of imperial cores. But they did not move as expected. They darted, feinted, double back. They launched missiles not on straight trajectories, but on slingshot arcs that exploited gravity in Wassalian. Tacticians had not predicted. Rode the pole of a minor moon, vanishing from sensors until it kissed the flank of a cruiser and tore it apart in an instant. The humans left no survivors, not from cruelty, but from efficiency. They did not broadcast boasts. They did not issue ultimatums. They let silence speak for them, and that silence was more terrifying than any roar. Within the Senate, voice again, their technology is crude, insisted a minister. They can threaten us. But crude is not the same as ineffective, murmured another. Consider radiation. They hurl fission and fusion like sticks of fire. We never adapted to such warfare because no one else would dare. But he broke off unwilling to finish the thought. Sarah reappeared before them, summoned not by courtese but by desperation. She entered the chamber with the same unhurried calm, as though she were visiting old acquaintances rather than adversaries. She greeted each delegate with politeness that only deepened their unease. "You've been busy?" one alien accused. She inclined her head. "We daughtry to keep occupied. Idleness breeds mischief." The sarcasm was sounder stated. Most of them missed it. A few did not. "You are attacking our holdings." Another snarled, her brows lifted in mock surprise. "Attacking? No, we are pruning." There's a difference. Attacks are loud, indiscriminate. Pruning is careful, selective, intentional. We prefer to be tidy. The translation of tidy spread through the chamber like a shiver. It sounded harmless, almost domestic, yet in Hermoth it carried a weight that pressed down on them like gravity. One minister demanded, "Do you mean to threaten the stability of the empire over a handful of girls?" Sarah smiled gently. "No, note over, a handful of girls, over the principle of M." Her phrasing landed like a stone in a still pond. They had thought of humans as small, fragile, easily dismissed. The other was a woman, speaking as though humanity itself were the axis upon which their empire might tilt. Inthigalares above a younger alien whispered to his companion, "Why does she not raise her voice?" Because Theothar replied softly, "She does not need to." Beyond words, the evidence mounted. Imperial convoys reported strange disappearances. Ships vanished from scanners only to reappear as wreckage days later. Communications broke down at critical moments. Human saboteurs, inside Imperial facilities, not with advanced cloaking, but with mundane disguises and audacious boldness. They laughed while detonating charges, joked while disabling systems. One was recorded saying, "We're just the warm-up act. You haven't met the main band yet." The aliens did not understand the metaphor, but they understood the menace. The Senate tried to rally. Fleets were dispatched. Armies mobilized. Yet at every turn, the humans were there first, nipping, striking, vanishing. They fought, not like soldiers, but like predators who had been underestimated too many times. Count Sarah addressed the council one last time in that phase of the struggle. "You misunderstand us still. We are not asking for permission. We are offering you a choice, return them, and this ends with dignity. Refuse, and it ends with lessons." An elder slammed a claw against the table. "You cannot teach us lessons. We are the Empire." Her smile did not waver. Empires fall, lessons remain. Few words rang out in the chamber long after she had left. Some scoffed, some whispered, a few trembled. On a remote moon, the captive girls huddled together. Unaware of the vast drama unfolding in their name, they whispered stories of home, of summer nights, of parents who would not stop searching. One of them, the youngest, murmured through cracked lips, "They don't know my mother. They don't know any of our mothers." She said it not as hope, but as fact. Back in the Empire's heart, dissent grew. Species long subdued began to wonder if perhaps the humans were showing them a path. Whispers of rebellion mingled with rumors of human victories. For the first time, in generations, cracks appeared in the imperial facade. A frightened delegate pleaded in private chambers. "Why do they fight this way? Why do they not declare their objectives? Another replied grimly, because they are not trying to frighten us, they are trying to finish us. The council resisted that conclusion, clinging to arrogance like armor. Yet unease bled into every conversation. They remember the envoy's calm, smiles that seemed to wide the words that lingered like smoke. They began to suspect that humans were not improvising, but executing a plan. And indeed, they were. For humanity had long ago prepared for this possibility beneath their quarrels. And chaos, beneath their endless arguments, lay a unity as old as kinship, the defense off their own. Every insult, every abduction, every loss was tallied, not in grief, but in ledger lines of vengeance. They had studied the Empire quietly, patiently, waiting for the mistake that would ignite them. Now Eth had come, and the trap was closing. Sarah sat alone in her quarters, reviewing reports. Outpost gone, convoys intercepted, supply chains unraveling. She read each one without triumph, without joy, only with the steady gaze of someone carrying out the inevitable. Herr Professor entered hesitant. Do you think they understand yet? She closed the report and looked up, her eyes calm. They understand enough to be afraid, but not enough to stop. The officers wallowed. What happens when they do stop? Her smile returned. Quiet and terrible, then it will be too late. The Empire still told itself it was in quadrille. The Senate still thundered with speeches. But beneath the grandeur, the first threads of fear wound tight. They remembered her warning. Restraint on Seremovt does not return easily, and they began to grasp too late that humanity's restraint had already been broken. In the void beyond, fleets gathered not vast, not elegant, but purposeful. They moved like shadows at the edge of sight, circling, waiting. And with each passing day, another outpost flickered out like a candle snuffed in the dark. The Empire thought it was facing rebellion. It was facing revelation. And in the silence that followed Sarah's last smile, the galaxy began to realize what it had awakened. They thought the first fires were accidents. A reactor surge, a patrol lost to miscalculation, a convoy that disappeared into a dust storm. Even when the map of the Empire began to grow with circular voids where outposts had been, pride dismissed them. As unison, pride is a poor navigator. Pride never sees a storm coming until itis inside of it. Operation Extinction Protocol did not begin. With drums, it began with courtesy. Sarah Consincade sent one more message phrased with theomestic softness of a neighbor announcing a visit. We are coming, it read. We will be careful. We will be thorough. We will be home before supper. The council laughed at the quaint tone. They did not understand the message was also an itinerary. The first movement was invisible. Human engineers wearing patch suits and humming songs through open comes-placed devices in the Empire's translation hubs. They joked as they worked, one whistling while clipping a line, another cheerful libering a phrase from old Earth baseball. Bases loaded, bottom of the ninth. The aliens who intercept fragments of the chatter could not parse the metaphors. Hours later, the beacons collapsed, and fleets that had once been a single organism discovered the cold loneliness of isolation. The second movement was loud. Because loudness was part of the lesson, human destroyers appeared above a labor moon, their transmissions impossibly polite. Good afternoon. Evacuate within 10 minutes. We are correcting an error. Overseers, Laud refused, and within minutes watched armored Marines descend in steady lines. They did not swagger. They moved with the silence of workers carrying out a necessary repair. One soldier saluted a group of trembling laborers and said, "You're free now. Sorry for the delay." Far across the rim on a cold moon called Virix 12, the captured girls waited in sterile cells. One had carved marks into the floor, one for each day stolen. Another had whispered lullabies to herself when night terror clawed at her chest. When the Marines arrived, breaching the walls with a thunder of inevitability, they spoke with absurd gentleness. "Ma'am," one said to a girl, barely 17, "we're late. That's on us." The Senate tried to cloak fear and rage. Ministers demanded for why imperial sensors were failing, why human missiles bent trajectories like dancers, why fleets strained for centuries were unraveling in weeks. An exhausted analyst, scales dulled with sleeplessness, explained that humans were hiding inside arithmetic itself. Their flight paths looked like errors until the final instant when the error became fatal. The chamber erupted in denial, but those horror-remembered predators felt their stomachs twist. Sarah did not watch the feeds of violence. She sat in a quiet cabin writing names by hand, names of children recovered, names of Marines who had fallen. Every letter pulled a line tighter in her face. When her first officer brought her the report that they girls of Irexis 12 were safe, she closed her eyes and exhaled a sound like prayer thought had been trapped too long. "Are we being clear?" she asked softly. "Clear as glass," the officer replied. "Stations that surrender are untouched. Stations that resist are pruned." "Good," she said. "Clarity is kindness." The Empire attempted a grand counterstroke, a maneuver so scripted their admirals called it inevitability. Human ships refused inevitability. They dove through gravity wells, slingshotting into places no simulator said possible. A carrier executed. A burn so deep, the enemy called it suicide. Hours later, it reappeared, its gun singing, its captain an old woman with a voice like gravel saying, because Themath looked lonely. One by one, the Empire's certainties fractured. Shield designed to resist exotic weapons failed against crude bursts of radiation. Communications lines that had always been sterile conduits suddenly blossomed with humor. Song lyrics, recipes, fragments of Shakespeare, all hiding codes that rearranged imperial logistics until fleets tripped over themselves. The Terra had once served the Council had been dusted with a harmless tracer powder. Later, analysis of its residue revealed airflow maps of the interior camber, including the escape ducts. Hospitality had been reconnaissance. At last, the Emperor himself demanded a transmission. He expected to hear Rage Dot instead. Sarah greeted him, as though he were a weary neighbor. "You look tired," she said, and the translator strained to carry compassion without dulling the steel. "You are a traitor to Order Hesnet." She tilted her head. "No, a steward," he sneered. "What do Youstward limits?" she answered softly. "We place them where they should have always been." He called humanity barbaric. She smiled faintly. "Barbaric once meant people who spoke differently. We do. We simply say things you don't want to hear." He demanded conditions. She listed them calmly. The return of all children stolen, the dismantling of markets, restitution made by the guilty themselves. "Do this," she promised, "and you will live. Long enough to carry your own shame home." "You threaten genocide," he accused. "No," she said, her voice a blade hidden in velvet. "We threaten the end of your appetite." The third movement of the protocol unfolded across the Empire. The Stargate. Lattice trembled, then locked. Human code smuggled months ago in translation updates, wrapped in riddles and jokes, woke with the phrase, "We are coming." Now gates refused to carry ships tagged with enforcement or slaver designations. Armadas that had moved like blood arteries froze. Refugees meanwhile traveled freely. The Empire discovered how quickly grandeur starves when only cruelty is denied passage. Envy Rix 12, a small girl, held a Marine's hand and asked if her mother would scold her for being gone. "She only scolded herself," he said gently. She nodded, then demanded a sandwich. He laughed, then wept, then laughed again. In the Senate, bluster evaporated. On 30 worlds, rebellion rose in sudden flame. The sight of human ships escorting refugee flotillas did something mathematics could not measure. It untaught fear. A translucent bone species that had served the Empire for centuries sent her a message. "We never understood family. We do now." She responded with coordinates for safe passage and absurdly recipes for bread. On laboratories that refused to yield, kinetic rods fell like divina punctuation. Beacons lit corridors seconds before steel from orbit turned them into rubble. Through it all, Sarah's ledger grew. She did not gloat. She counted at the edge of the Imperial home system. Humanity formed a ring of ships. The Emperor's voice returned, stripped of ice, heavy with fear. "What will satisfy you? Restitution, restoration, resignation," she answered. "And if I refuse?" She paused, her gaze steady. "Then we finish the work." "They're here. Children here," he said desperately. "There are children everywhere," she whispered. And for the first time, her voice frayed. "That is why we warned you." On her flagship, the protocol waited in 3 toggles. The first locked the lattice permanently against Imperial predation. The second broadcast every record of every abduction. Across every channel, the third would strike the shipyards. Scalpel strikes. Necessary surgery, her officers watched her hands. She toggled the first. Gates froze. Patrols stranded mid-jump became statues. She toggled the second screen's Bloom Daycross, the Empire with evidence, invoices, reports, names. Husbands found wives reading the ledgers of their crimes. Scientists saw their studies return as indictments. 1,000 worlds learned what their empire had always caused. The Emperor howled to cut the feed. His technicians could not. Truthon's freed does not kneel. Sarah rested her hand on the third switch and did not press it. Mercy whispered, sounding like her grandmother at supper. One more chance. She sent a single sentence. Close the yards yourself. Announce it. Make it so. Alarms flared across the Sisto. Yards shut down. Silence replaced centuries of clanghanger. The Emperor looked at her broken. We will build, he muttered. She inclined her head. Not in promise, but in physics. Then we will return, he hissed. You cannot rule us. We don't want to, she said. We want you to stop needing rulers. Cruisers formed for one final charge. Sarah lifted her hand. The human-ring tightened. The cruisers faltered, then broke, not under fire, but under the weight of inevitability. From the recovered transport, a child's voice reached her bridge. Are we going homono? Yes, Sarah said to the galaxy. Now the human fleet began to turn. No triumphant, but resolute. Behind them, doors opened that had been locked 4 lifetimes. The protocol had worked. The Empire spun still, but gravity had shifted. Then a quiet alert chimed. An encrypted burst deep from within Thepalays, a list of names, not human. Children thought extinct, hidden in vaults. The message ended. They are alive. Sarah's hand hovered again over third switch. Mercy and justice breathed together. The stars leaned close, patient, as though they too wanted to know what humanity would do when the first daughters were safe and the last were still in chains.